Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for CHSN. We are brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. With Charlie Roumeliotis, I am Pat Boyle. Charlie, how you doing?
Pat, I'm doing well. We are always in lockstep matching, it feels like, but I don't have the circular Hockey Night in Canada logo. That is one of the best shirts I've ever seen. I'm very jealous that you have that on.
Appreciate that. Early Father's Day gift. And you know what a huge fan I am of Hockey Night in Canada. And actually just got back from vacation. And one thing when you travel out of the country, I was in Mexico, you never know if you're going to be able to watch the Stanley Cup playoffs, in this case, the final, on TV in your room because of the different systems that they have. Here's a message to hotel groups or big chains or what have you. How about offer the customer a sports TV package? So if you're a European traveling to North America and you want to watch your favorite soccer team or what have you, and it's not going to be on the basic hotel room setup, offer the guest an upgrade. And I think you would find people that would jump on those opportunities. Instead, I'm trying, inside the room, it said TNT was available. So I assumed, game one was going to be there. And it was like TNT, and it just was movies all the time. And it never went to anything of what was being broadcast in the United States. But I got around it. I had a savvy, tech-savvy son who got me it illegally. But just a little warning out there to hotel groups. Offer that possible upgrade or even like a la carte, on demand, something like that. And I think you'd see sports craze guests that would jump on the opportunity to watch their favorite sport, favorite team.
I totally agree. And I'm going to connect with your son after this because my brother is getting married on Saturday, and his biggest concern right after they're going on their honeymoon out of the country, and potential game 6 and 7 are going to line up with him on his honeymoon. And he's already trying to figure out, how am I going to be able to watch game 6 and 7 from out of the country? So is it going to be on the hotel TV? I'm not sure. Is he going to have to fire up a live stream? I'm not sure. But I agree. There's always before the trip even happens, you're trying to prepare for a way like, God, I hope my hotel has this channel.
Yeah. The last thing his lovely bride wants to hear is his concern about being able to watch the Stanley Cup Final on his honeymoon.
To be fair, so game 3 coincided with the rehearsal dinner. Game 4 is coinciding with a little pre-wedding party. Game 5 is going to be on his wedding day. So game 6 and 7 are honeymoon. So it's taken up a lot of the nights of the Stanley Cup Final. So I feel like we deserve, maybe my brother more so, deserves to be able to watch the final 2 games if it gets there.
I love because you're triplets. It's a we thing for you, even though it's his wedding. You're like, we've endured enough here. We. There you go, Charlie.
Before the series even started, we were already mapping out what the Stanley Cup Final schedule looks like, and we saw that game 5 was going to be on his wedding day. And I had told my brother, I said, if Edmonton is in a potential clinching situation where they can win the Stanley Cup on your wedding day, I half jokingly said, we're going to find a way to get a projector on there to watch McDavid get his first cup. But I also said, I will be making a request to the DJ if Edmonton wins the Stanley Cup and we are playing La Bamba at your wedding.
Oh, very nice.
But unfortunately, it's not shaping out that way because Edmonton is going to need 6 games at least if they want to get back into it, which we will talk about later.
Yeah, well, that's coming up. Let's talk a little bit about the combine that took place last weekend in Buffalo. Blackhawks did not do any dinners. I guess that was kind of a talking point. But once you hear Kyle Davidson's rationale behind it, it makes total sense. They feel that they were comfortable with the prospect group. They had already done dinner with many of them and one-on-ones over the last several months. And in Buffalo, there aren't many places to hide. So you're trying to get something done, and you're watching prospect A, B, and C talk to the other teams that are in the top 10 with you. So I kind of get the fact that they didn't partake in any anchor bar wings with Porter Martone or whoever.
I was going to say, do we think Kyle got some cold feet after his viral Jeff Blashill dinner went viral at the Sienna Tavern? Maybe he's like, we got to kibosh these public dinners.
Yeah, well, look, if you're trying to fly under the radar and you're in the Viagra Triangle at one of the Tavern on Rush, I have to talk about your true attempts to be under the radar. That's not exactly being out of the limelight, so to speak.
Yes. Well, this is what I will say. This is kind of the first year in the Davidson era that it actually is kind of, we have to hold our cards to our vest on who we're taking out for dinner, because a couple years ago, it was clearly the pick was going to be Connor Bedard. Actually, if you rewind even before that, the Hawks didn't have a single first-round pick in the 2022 Montreal draft because they made all their deals the day of. So you weren't, it's like if Davidson was dining publicly with some of these prospects, no one was like, well, Kyle, they're not going to be available in the second round. So then you have 2013, Hawks were clearly going to take Connor Bedard. And then last year, the Hawks ended up taking Artem Levshunov for dinner, but Ivan Demidov was not there because he didn't participate in the scouting combine. The Hawks actually went to Florida to go visit him, or however that ended up working. So the Hawks were doing their due diligence. It wasn't going to be breaking news that the Hawks were dining with Levshunov, because they probably would have done that with Demidov if he ended up being there. But this year, there's a wide range of options that the Blackhawks could potentially take at number 3. We have it feels like they're kind of narrowing down their list a little bit as we get closer to the draft. But I think it would have been a story if it's like, oh, the Hawks took Michael Misa out for dinner, but they didn't take Porter Martone. What's going on here? You know what I mean? So I think it was more of that they have their information. Now I don't know if they want to tip their hand based on like who they had a dinner with in Buffalo.
Well, you mentioned Michael Misa. He said he had dinner with the Hawks several times in the past season, loves the organization. Everybody you seem to talk to has, Matthew Schaefer, the clear-cut number 1, and Michael Misa, a clear-cut number 2, and then there is a drop-off to the tier that the Blackhawks will be picking from there in the third, with the third overall pick. So the question is, should they attempt to trade up and grab Misa at 2? What are your thoughts on trying to get into that tier and what it might cost the Blackhawks?
Yeah, I think if the Hawks really, really wanted Michael Misa and like go up to go trade it for him, he would have to be in such a separate tier for you to give up draft equity or whatever assets it would take to go out and get a guy that you feel is clearly better than, the drop off from 2 to 3. And so if that is the case, we've seen Kyle get aggressive in the past when it comes to wanting to trade up. We all know the Columbus, where the Blackhawks tried getting that second, I think it was the 4th overall pick in last year's draft to go get Ivan Demidov too, like reportedly. And so Kyle is not afraid to make those aggressive type pitches. But I wonder internally what the Blackhawks rankings are. Like, what's the separation between Michael Misa and an Anton Frondell or a Caleb Desnoyers or a Porter Martone or James Higgins? Like, how significant is that gap? And then the Hawks have to decide if it's worth giving up more assets to go get him. If the Hawks feel that Misa is clear cut above those guys, I say, why not? Go try. Even if it doesn't come to fruition, at least they can say we made an attempt. Versus if the separation isn't that significant, then you go on and take the best player available at number 3 and you use those other assets that you would have used in a Michael Misa trade elsewhere if they wanted to move up in the back half of the first round, whether it's moving up from like 26 to whatever, 20 if they feel like a guy is going ahead of them. That's where you can kind of capitalize on the draft equity that Chicago has.
Yeah, kind of like what they did with Sam Rinzel a few years back, jumping in late in that first round. Look, I'm always up for kicking the tires on things like this. I think you make a great point is what is the gap between tier one with Schaefer and Misa and then tier two with Frondell, Desnoyers, and Martone and others. I would say this, if the asking price is anything involving next year's Blackhawks number one pick, I would stay clear of that. I would not like to give up an opportunity to get Gavin McKenna. If, I think it's safe to assume that the Hawks are going to be in a lottery situation. And we've seen that, you can be the New York Islanders and you can be and have some puck luck on lottery day. So I would like a bite at that apple because I do believe McKenna is that special of a player.
100%. I think McKenna is in the Bedard type generational talent, which it feels like every year now or every other year we're throwing around that generational type talent. But you see some of the numbers that McKenna was putting up. I mean, the guy was on like a 59 game point streak. I mean, it's just unbelievable stuff.
How about the rumors that he may be going to Penn State?
I did see that.
I've got a daughter who's going to be a senior at Penn State and a son that's going to be a freshman. So I've got boots on the ground in State College.
You'll have
I've already
scouting
talked,
reports.
we had a long discussion on this trip, but like Dad may be coming in to Happy Valley to watch a little bit of hockey if you know what I'm saying. So let's get some tickets to see the Gavin McKenna show. Again, I don't know if that's going to play out that way, but there have been rumors that McKenna is linked to playing at Penn State.
So you're going to be going to Penn State next year, not to visit your daughter, but it's going to be a business trip for you. You're like, hey, I got to work, honey. Sorry.
Yeah, how are things going? I got to go see Gavin McKenna. It's a whiteout, and we're going to watch a little hockey. Let's talk about some of the other possible prospects that the Hawks are mulling over with that third overall pick. Porter Martone said he'd be honored if the Blackhawks took him at number 3. We know what Martone brings. He brings size to the equation, high compete, willing to bring the physicality, willing to drop the gloves. The issue is the skating, which is an area you can improve. Like I was talking to somebody and they were like, you can't necessarily teach compete level or hockey IQ. You have it or you don't. You can take someone who does not have great technique in skating or is not a fast skater and see them improve in that area. And so that is something that, again, if you're hoping to find the Matthew Knies type of player, I don't think you're going to find that in Porter Martone. But I do think he can make strides when it comes to his skating.
For sure. When I saw the quotes coming out from Porter Martone, he was saying he would be honored by being a Blackhawk if they take him at number 3. And he was also like projecting, he's looking ahead. He's like, they got a great young core. Those are the teams that, or you can see that's going to win a Stanley Cup one day. And so you can almost feel him like trying to pitch himself to the Blackhawks because he can see the potential there. And Kyle Davidson also did a media availability with the select few reporters that were in Buffalo for this combine, for the scouting combine. And he had brought up the fact that you can't have all the same types of players. Like not all 12 forwards are going to play the same way. Not all 6 defensemen are going to play the same way. You do have to mix and match. Where I think teams could get in trouble is if they go off the board, like if they go out of their way to go take someone just because they're like, we're missing a guy that has compete or that can go to the dirty areas. Let's pass up a guy that's higher on our board and go this way because we need more of this when you're overlooking the guy that is actually higher on the board. But so I think Kyle left the door open for the Hawks to not overlook a player like Porter Martone that would bring a different element, even though he doesn't have the high-end skating that Kyle and the rest of his staff want his teams to play with. Having said that, I still would be surprised if Porter Martone was the pick at number 3 because it feels like some of the options in that range are going to be more appealing given the fact that they play center. And if you are taking a winger at number 3, you better hope that he's a guy like Mitch Marner or a guy like Matthew Tkachuk or Brady Tkachuk, because if you look at some of the drafts over time, the ones that look awful, like awful picks, are the ones where you drafted a winger and that was really all they were able to provide. Like I think of 𝗻𝗎 𝗬𝗓𝗏 with the Edmonton Oilers, where he was a winger. They got taken, I think, 4 overall. It's like, well, if he's not a center where you know that it's like, okay, we can slide him in the second or third line center position and he still wins faceoffs. Maybe he wasn't that top 6 guy that they were hoping, but he turned into a useful NHL player. Whereas if you're a winger and the ceiling doesn't come to fruition, it's hard to just be like, well, the Hawks just took a guy at number 3 overall and now he's a middle 6 winger or a third line winger. And it's like that, that would be a failure versus a guy that you project to be a top 6 center, but he ends up falling and sliding into be like an unbelievable second or third line center. And, long term, that's the better fit.
So if the Hawks don't go with Porter Martone at number 3, the winger in this group, we move on to the centers, and one of those guys is Caleb Desnoyers. Did not participate in the fitness testing in Buffalo. He was dealing with 2 injured wrists since November. Said he'll recover fast, but might need to do some stuff, which indicates he may have to have some, surgical procedures or whatnot. And then his player comp that he says he's like is Jonathan Toews. Certainly we know all about Johnny. So stylistically, he's got a game that may look like Jonathan Toews, but the key with Desnoyers is he's a smaller frame. He's 6'2", but his body's not filled out. He's 178, and it's going to take time for him to gain that strength and become the veteran body that is truly the Jonathan Toews difference maker. So when you're talking about Desnoyers, I think you need to allow some time for him to mature as this all-around player, especially with the body type.
Yeah, I saw the video of Desnoyers being asked who his player comparable is, and he said Jonathan Toews with like a big smile on his face, almost like to say, nudge, nudge, Chicago, interested in you at number 3. I really liked it, the overall package that Desnoyers brings as far as his two-way ability, his offensive numbers, and then you hear that he comes out with, hey, I've been dealing with 2 injured wrists, not recently, but since November. So he's basically playing the majority of the season with 2 injured wrists. I don't think long-term I would be concerned about that, because it's not like a Caden Lindstrom situation last year where it's like back stuff, where it's like, okay, this could be a concern long-term, because typically as you age, the back doesn't get any better. But with wrists, it's kind of different. So it feels like if he gets procedures done, whatever that looks like, feels like it's going to heal back to 100% and he'll be fine. So really no concern there. But yeah, it does kind of put into perspective. I think Desnoyers did get some sort of criticism online because he had more of a quiet, I think it was Memorial Cup or a playoff stretch. And then when you hear that he's dealing with injuries, you're like, okay, well that makes it understandable. But the one thing I'll say is I like when I see players that are like 6'2", 6'3", but then you see 178 pounds, you're like, we can work with that. Like you can add muscle over time, even though it might take some time. This example will always stick to me, but Drake Batherson for the Ottawa Senators, when he got drafted, it was in the 4th round of 2017. I think he was like 6'1" or something in his draft class, and he was like 145 or 150 pounds. If you go look at him now, he's 6'3", 200 pounds. Like he added 50 pounds since his draft class. And so I never put stock into the immediate weight of their draft class because it feels like that's workable. And so if you like what he'll bring to the table and you could project a couple years down the line where he adds 20, 30 pounds to his frame, and then you look up and you're like, oh, he's 200 pounds or 210. Now he's actually built like Jonathan Toews or whatever his player comparable would be in his mind, then I think that's great. But yeah, I love Caleb Desnoyers. It's been interesting to see since we did this podcast right when the Hawks won the draft lottery, we had mentioned his name right off the bat. Like, this is a guy that you want to keep an eye on. And it's funny because at the time, Desnoyers' name was not really that popular to go in that number 3 range. It was more Martone, Hagens, Frondell. And now you add Desnoyers into the mix and you're like, the Hawks have some options here at number 3.
Yeah, and if you are looking for that two-way player, another prospect that would be in that Desnoyers bucket would be Anton Frondell, the Swedish center, tries to model his game after 𝗙cie 𝗏𝗏. And I love how we're picking comps, or a lot of the comps are the teams we're seeing right now, 𝗏cie 𝗄𝗲, whatnot. The thing about Frondell is, he's 6'1", but he's almost 200 pounds, Charlie, and he's a thicker frame. So while you're hoping we can work with that when you look at Desnoyers and filling out, you look at Frondell, and he has already kind of developed more into his frame. And that's shown, in the Swedish league against some players with veteran bodies. He has held his own. Now, he did not have a great under 18 world championship. And, part of that was maybe how he was thrust into the fray. But I think you got to not be a prisoner of the moment too. While we're giving players passes for not playing because they were injured, I think you got to give a little leeway to somebody who may have not had the best game or two in a tournament when you consider all the other things that have gone into this, to the equation.
For sure. And especially that young of an age, like even you saw how hard it is at the Worlds, where you get thrown into a tournament with guys that you've never played before, and you're just kind of assembling a team together for just a short span. Like there's bound to be inconsistencies in some of even the elite players' games, because you're like, well, we haven't played together, so you're getting used to new line mates, and so in Frondell's case, as a younger player trying to navigate that, I don't really have any concern based on the things that you just outlined. So from day one, since we've done this podcast, when the Hawks won the draft lot, or when the Hawks nailed down the number 3 pick in the draft lottery, the two names I had said to focus on is Caleb Desnoyers and Anton Frondell. And I think, as I sit here today, I think I like Frondell just a little bit better than Caleb Desnoyers. I think you mentioned they both have two-way elements, 200-foot game. I've seen online that there is some question mark as to whether Anton Frondell would be a long-term winger or center. I think he would be a center, and I don't know if there would be really much doubt in that for me, because of the overall, like what his overall package lines up to be. And the fact that he mentions Alexander Barkov as his player comparable, I love hearing who the players feel like they want to model their game after, because it gives you a glimpse of what their mentality is. Yeah. Like if you get a guy like Anton Frondell, it's like, oh, who's your favorite player to watch? And he's like, Connor McDavid. It's like, well, that's unrealistic for him to be Connor McDavid, right? Yeah. But if he's like, if he kind of if he hones in on a player that he feels like he can study, like even if Frondell is half of what Alexander Barkov is, I think he could be a really good player in the NHL. So I love everything about Frondell. I think the Blackhawks are enamored with him too. And it's just trying to figure out, okay, there are a lot of pieces here that Chicago can take at number 3. Which of these 4 or 5 guys are going to separate themselves and make themselves the pick for Chicago at number 3?
And one of the things that could separate Frondell from, say, someone like Desnoyers, not just the thicker frame, but his great one-time shot. He brings that to the table as well. So you look at the 200-foot game, you look at the size, you look at the mentality, the player that he picks. I mean, I think we could all live with a Alexander Barkov type performance for the Blackhawks on the West Side over the next 8 to 10 years. We'd all sign up for that. And then you factor in on the offensive side a great one-timer. Like you said, to me, that's what pushes Frondell to the top of my list of candidates at number 3.
There was a video that I saw kind of going semi-viral like a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago of Frondell taking a backhand shot with one hand and like popping it top shelf inside a wheel of a car. Like they had like a car wheel that was just hanging off the post, and he just one-handed, boom, snipe. So I'm like, wow, like that's incredible. Not just the shot, but the backhand strength to have on your wrists. I mean, I'll sign up for that any day too, if you can add the goal scoring to go along with his two-way center ability.
We talked a little bit about Buffalo and what went on at the Combine. Kyle Davidson spoke to the few reporters that made the trek to New York, and Kyle said he's very open and comfortable with trading draft capital for NHL players, but he did make the point that the salary cap and the fact that it's rising may limit their ability to leverage the added cap space that they have. So the timing for this jump when it comes to the salary cap increase may be hurting the Hawks a bit in an area that they had an upper hand against the rest of the league. Now the rest of the league is getting a bump themselves. Still, the Hawks have one of the most amounts of room. $39 million in cap space right now?
Something in that range.
Yeah. So we will see how that all plays out, but it's not surprising that he would consider trading draft capital for NHL players. And then when you look at some of the players that are available out there, 𝗵𝗂 is one that continues to be mentioned as the Hawks being possibly interested in the soon-to-be restricted free agent.
Yeah. So two things. When it comes to the salary cap rising exponentially over the next several years, that is very good for the Blackhawks in the long term. But in the short term, you're right. It does now. Teams that are at the ceiling are now going to get a little bit of breathing room, and they don't have to necessarily offload contracts like they once would if the salary cap was staying stagnant year over year and the players' salaries continued to increase. And so, but I don't think that's a real concern though, because it feels like the Blackhawks have used their financial cap space as leverage in the past. And so it's not like they were banking on it going into this summer. But as far as, just the free agents too, like you look at some of the lists and you're like, okay, Mitch Marner, probably not going to be in Chicago, right? And then you can go down the list of like, 𝗦cie 𝗰𝗶𝗟𝗏 is a guy that I think would be a really good fit for Chicago if he wanted to come here. But then a few days ago, I can't remember which NHL reporter had reported winning is the primary concern for 𝗦cie 𝗰𝗟𝗏. He does not care about the dollar value or the money. Not that he doesn't care about it, but that's not a priority for him. So then you hear that and you're like, well, Chicago would have an opportunity. Chicago could present the opportunity for him to make a lot of money, but also win in the long term. But in the short term, it's probably not going to happen. So he might not even consider Chicago when you hear something like that. So when Kyle says he's very open and comfortable to trading draft capital to acquire NHL players, that is almost it's almost a better route to go down, because the asset that you're getting is coming at a cost controlled, like what his cost would be as far as the salary cap dollars, versus if you go to free agency and the second July 1st hits, you're going to be in a bidding war with all these other teams, and then you might give out irresponsible contracts just because that's what you needed to do to land a fish of that caliber. And so we saw some last year where the Blackhawks went to Boston and they traded for Nick Foligno and Taylor Hall a couple years ago. And so you saw them leverage that, where they're like, okay, let's go get these guys that are under control. I know Foligno hadn't signed the contract yet, but they had an understanding that he would. Taylor Hall had 2 years left on his contract. It's like, let's go out and get a guy like that where we know what we're going to have and we don't have to have some sort of bidding war on the open market. So I think that actually might make more sense for Chicago to try to acquire useful players via trade versus trying to throw some darts in free agency that may or may not hit.
And then if you follow that, you got to worry too about players, no trade clauses that some of them have. seems to be the type of player that you want to acquire that's a difference maker, usually carries some no movement type clause. So you'd have to deal with that. Like some people are looking at, Sam Bennett and what he's done for Florida and how great that would look on their team. To me, I think Florida's going to do everything they can to keep him. And it also sounds like, Toronto might be, the landing place. So not only do you look at it from a Blackhawks perspective, but you got to look at it from the player's perspective. And like, because of the salary cap situation, there's more suitors than ever that are going to be, involved in these negotiations in the offseason. And it's going to make that much more difficult for the Blackhawks to add that player if they deviate a little bit from the draft prospect route. One thing we're seeing is Dallas reacting to not advancing to the Stanley Cup Final, and we already saw the coaching change, and you're hearing that they may need to change the makeup of their team. It sounds a little bit like what happened to the Blackhawks in 2011 and 2012 when they had first round exits, and does the core need to change, and does Kane need to be moved, and all the questions that came during that point. Some of those same questions are happening in Dallas right now, and a name that you hear pop up that you wouldn't think would be available could be available in Jason Robertson.
Yeah, and I actually think in a more recent example might be the Florida Panthers, where they trade Jonathan Huberdeau to get Matthew Tkachuk to change the identity of their team. And I think if you're Chicago, I don't know what the framework would look like, or I don't even know what the Dallas Stars would be trying to accomplish with that. Like, would they be trying to clear his cap space to try to get aggressive somewhere else, or would they be looking for a hockey type trade where you trade Jason Robertson to whatever, Buffalo for JJ Peterka and more, or whatever, to try to just change up both makeups? I have no idea, but it is, I think the Florida Panthers have provided some sort of blueprint that it's like, the Florida Panthers, the way they're assembled is very unique, but because a lot of those guys have been like claimed off waivers or trades or whatever that they weren't expecting, like the Sam Reinhart deal, but it's like they've really kind of ignited this mentality among general managers that it's like, okay, we're not going to be afraid to trade a really important member of our team if we feel like it's going to elevate the group in the playoffs. And so we'll see what happens there.
Okay, any other things that you want to take away from Kyle Davidson or what happened in Buffalo at the Combine?
The only other noteworthy thing that I saw Kyle Davidson say is that he felt like next year's roster is going to be totally different than last year's going into training camp, where last year it was it was a lot of veterans, especially up front. This year, we saw the influx of talent towards the final 15 games of this past season with Frank Nazar and Oliver Moore and Landon Slager and all those players. It feels like the Hawks really want to give their young players an opportunity to lock down roles starting in training camp this year. And so that's going to be the only difference. I don't think you're going to see the Hawks make a ton of moves in free agency or whatever to get a bunch of veterans like they did last year with the Pat Maroons and the Alec Martinez's. I think this coming year is the year where they're like, we got to see what we have in these young players and what roles they might carve out for themselves. So let's make sure that we're just surrounding them with a strong supporting cast to kind of prop them up a little bit.
It's going to be exciting. I mean, like between now and the middle of July, we saw some glimpses last year at the end of the season of the draft prospects coming to life in the NHL and seeing at how they've developed already early on in their career and how much excitement that was, like going to Montreal, a team in the thick of the playoff hunt and winning there in an electric building. And now we're going to see more young players be a part of the equation from the jump. But it's also going to be interesting to see what they do on the back end. Like, I can't imagine they're going to have Connor Murphy as the lone veteran presence with five, between 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and a bunch of guys that are in their first, second, and third years in the National Hockey League. So I would think that they would add some depth, like one veteran presence on the back end, but it's also going to be interesting to see what they do up front too. And we haven't also talked about, you talk about roles, all these players, you're waiting for some of the physicality to come to the equation. You may need to go find some of that in the interim before the players that you've earmarked and drafted that bring that to the table before they get to the NHL.
Right. You don't want to get into a situation like we saw 2 years ago where the Hawks dealt with like 9 injuries at once, and then you had guys like Rem Pitlick playing on the first line because the Hawks just couldn't withstand those injuries. And so it's got to be a balance where you want to make sure that these young players are getting the opportunity to play in those significant roles, but you also don't want to run into a situation where if a couple of them get hurt or you have a couple injuries to the roster, then all of those young players are playing a notch higher in the lineup, and then it's kind of like they're getting thrown into a situation that's not beneficial for them long term. So Hawks I'm sure that's being discussed internally as they approach free agency to see how they want to make sure that they're adding some veteran depth for insurance purposes, but not to supplement or to take over the roles for those young players.
All right, another delay here between games, 2 days off between games 3 and 4. Decisive game 3 victory for Florida as the series shifted to sunrise. Are you concerned about the Edmonton Oilers and your pick to win the Cup being down 2-1 and looking at game 4 on Thursday night?
First off, why is there 2 days in between in Florida, but it's only 1 day for the travel day? Because game 5 is on Saturday, so they're going game 4 Thursday. Typically, they build the extra day into the travel day. So I'm not, maybe it's
I have to think this is TV related, as it usually is, and it's probably NBA related. So it's probably the NBA wanted to drag things out, and they both sit down and they work around, making sure that they're standalones with the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Final.
Okay, so there's an NBA game on tonight, Wednesday?
Yes, there is a game tonight.
Okay, that makes sense because I know Canadian Hockey Night in Canada, they like their Saturday nights, right? So that was never going to get moved. So, okay, I guess that makes sense. Am I concerned about the Oilers? A little bit. I feel like game 4, this might sound so dumb, but I think the winner of game 4 might win the series. Like, is probably going to win the series because if Florida wins to make it 3-1, that's really difficult for Edmonton to then win 3 in a row against Florida. I know they did it last year when they rallied from 3-0 down, but to do it 2 years in a row against that team that already knows how to win now would be hard. But if you're Edmonton and you win on the road in game 4 to even it up 2-2, that feels like the hardest part of the series was right there as far as you felt Florida tilting the momentum in their favor. Florida regained control of the series. And if you find a way to regain control, then going into home ice, I feel like Edmonton would have their swagger back, their confidence back. The concern I have is the status of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins because they have been dealing with obviously there's been no Zach Hyman in this series for Edmonton, which I feel has been okay because they've been able to just plug Corey Perry into that net front spot on the power play, and Corey Perry's been awesome on a line with 𝗏𝗏𝗏 and McDavid whenever they go to that trio. But if there's no Nugent-Hopkins, or if he's just whatever his status is, I know Monday he played but wasn't really effective, Edmonton is forced to play McDavid and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 on different lines because they do not have another center. If they load up McDavid and 𝗏𝗏𝗏 on a line, they just don't have another center that could carry the second line. And so that's my one concern. I like Edmonton to win game 4, but I don't feel incredibly confident. I actually feel more nervous that if Edmonton lost game 4, I think that series is close to finished.
Yeah, and I heard someone bring up the point, maybe the 2 days off led to the sloppy game that we saw in game 3. So I don't know, Does 2 more days off mean it's going to be extra sloppy? I hope not. But like, you can't have the parade to the box like we saw on Monday night. Evander Kane, you basically bury your team early on in that first period and let that building absolutely take over when you have a parade to the box and you're not even able to have your best players on the ice because you're trying to kill penalties. So that has to change if Edmonton wants to win Game 4. But I'm with you. I think the winner of Game 4 will have the final say in who wins this. If Edmonton does rally to even things up, that's a huge momentum burst as they head back to Alberta for Game 5.
Yeah, and Edmonton, you mentioned the power plays that Florida had in the last game. You just can't do it. And if you look at Edmonton's penalty kill percentage, it's been atrocious all playoffs. That's really been the one Achilles heel for the Edmonton Oilers, while the Florida Panthers, their special teams is just really strong on both sides, both the power play and the penalty kill. So that's got to be an area where if Edmonton wants to tilt the scales back in their favor, they're going to have to win the special teams battle. Feels like the discussion going into Game 4 is going to be whether Edmonton goes to Stuart Skinner or if they stay with Stuart Skinner or go to Calvin Pickard. Personally, I would go back to Stuart Skinner, probably with a shorter leash, just because he's the guy that you rode. Also saw a stat. Stuart Skinner in his career, 6-0 in Game 4s, .955 save percentage and 2 shutouts. So it feels like you go to the guy that kind of got you there. I know Calvin Pickard had that hot run and then Stuart Skinner took over and kind of ran with it. I think if Skinner shows a little bit of like an off night and Edmonton finds themselves down 2-0 or by 2 goals in Game 4, I think that's when you go to Calvin Pickard. But I wouldn't be so quick to yank him. It feels like the pull in Game 3 of going to Pickard from Skinner was to rest Skinner to make sure that he was ready to go for Game 4 and to kind of have a mental reset. So I think it'll be Skinner in Game 4. And then if things go sideways in the game, like early, like 2-0 deficit, I think that's when you go to Pickard.
All right. We began this podcast. I was on my soapbox asking hotels to offer a service to hook up the let's say European fan that has come over to North America and wants to watch said soccer team or whatever, and it's not on the hotel cable system, that they can, through the front desk or even from their room, hit something and it's there for them. Our producer extraordinaire for CHSN, who handles all of the podcasts for the network, Edgar Perez, said tvpass.org, you're welcome. And while that is a great solution, and again, but that's putting the onus on me, and then that's me watching playoff hockey on my phone, which I had to do the last 2 games. Hockey is a little tough watching it on your phone. I want, and again, you can mirror it, some of it, but I want some of the technological challenges done for me by the hotel. So I love your idea, Edgar. Thank you for tvpass.org. But I also want some of these hotels to, be able to have it on in the bar, that I don't have to be, looking at my phone between the bread basket and the olive oil.
Yes, I totally agree. Although I'm going to forward this link to my brother ASAP for his honeymoon as soon as he takes off. So thank you, Edgar.
That's Edgar's present. That's his wedding present.
I love it.
All right. Anything else?
I got nothing else. Let's have next time we talk, I'll be recovering from the wedding. So hopefully,
we will be recovering from the wedding. Yeah, well, have a great wedding.
Thanks.
I know it's not yours, but I know, and may it work things out with the hockey gods. No, seriously though, that it'll be an awesome time. Look forward to hearing the details about it on the next edition of the Breakaway Podcast. For Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Thanks for watching and listening. We'll catch you next time.